It being 1:30 p.m., the House will now proceed to the consideration of private members' business as listed on today's order paper.
Private members' business, consideration of motion M39 on immigration to Atlantic Canada in the name of Mrs. Lockhart.
Mrs. Lockhart, seconded by Mr. Casey. By Mr. Casey, Charlottetown, moves that the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration be instructed to undertake a study on immigration to Atlantic Canada to consider, among other things, the challenges associated with an aging population and shrinking population base, and 2 possible recommendations on how to increase immigration to the region, and that the committee report its findings to the House within 1 year of the adoption of this motion. Debate. The honourable member for Fundy Royal. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to stand in the House of Commons today to speak to the motion requesting the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration to undertake a study to explore ways to increase immigration to Atlantic Canada. I'd also like to speak today to the importance of studying the retention of those immigrants to ensure that we are achieving the goal of strengthening Atlantic Canada's workforce communities as well as the long-term economic outlook. At this time, I would also like to recognize my many colleagues from Atlantic Canada and across the country who see the importance of this issue and who have become joint seconders to the motion. I look forward to hearing their insight on this issue during the debate. Madam Speaker, although immigration is not an issue that I hear about specifically at the doors in Fundy Royal, many of the priorities and issues relating to economic growth and sustainable rural communities lead back to Atlantic Canada's aging and shrinking population. Let me give you a few examples. The Bay of Fundy is a world-renowned tourist destination and a key economic driver in my beautiful riding of Fundy Royal in New Brunswick. In fact, we're now preparing for the completion of the Fundy Trail Parkway and a significant increase in visitors to the area over the next few years. These visitors are drawn to the area to enjoy the coastline, Fundy National Park, and the host of adventures and authentic experiences offered in the communities throughout the riding. This summer, I spoke to many of the tourism operators who told me that they had a difficult time filling the job vacancies that they had this year, and they're having a hard time planning for future growth because of the limited workforce. In addition to the impact on businesses, I've also seen the impact of low population growth in communities. Rural schools are struggling to remain open because of dwindling enrollment. Just last year in Fundy Royal, both Norton Elementary School and the Riverside Albert Consolidated School were being considered for closure. Both communities lobbied successfully to keep their schools open, but they do realize they need a sustainable plan that will rely on maintaining and increasing school enrollment. Communities and employers across the region are feeling the impact of the current demographics. Ultimately, fewer people are of working age are supporting more people who require social benefits. Not only is this bad for economic growth, it means fewer services and higher taxes for residents in a weaker fiscal environment. This correlation was articulated well last winter in a Globe and Mail article authored by former New Brunswick Premier Frank McKenna. In his article, he urged the federal government to look at ways to increase immigration to Atlantic Canada as a means to move the dial in respect to the economy. Since that time, the shrinking population of Atlantic Canada has been identified as the most pressing concern for the future of the region by all Atlantic premiers. The aging population in Atlantic Canada means that right now our workforce is shrinking. We've got more people leaving the workforce than we do entering the workforce, and this is compounded by outmigration. From a business perspective, if you're looking to invest, to grow, and to innovate in Atlantic Canada, one of the things that you need to know is that you've got the people available to do the work. The other facet to an aging population is that there becomes a need for more and more caregivers. Due to the noted outmigration and new ways of life, many families are not in a position to care for their senior parents and grandparents. This reality will mean a higher demand for home care workers and frontline health care workers at the same time that the workforce is shrinking. To paint a picture for members who may not be familiar with the realities of the situation in Atlantic Canada, I ask you to consider these facts. Statistics tell us that in New Brunswick, we now sustain more deaths than births. The Atlantic region has the second lowest fertility rate in Canada, and the population in the Atlantic region has aged twice as fast as Alberta since 1971, meaning that now the median age is 8 years older than Alberta. The other factor that we must consider is that Atlantic Canada has not kept up with the rest of Canada when it comes to immigration statistics. In 2006, Canada received 250,000 immigrants. Although Atlantic Canada makes up roughly 7% of the total Canadian population, less than 2% of immigrants declared Atlantic Canada as their intended destination. Of those, only 40% were expected to stay, and 90% intended to live in urban areas of the region. Madam Speaker, we have passed the point where we can repopulate without intervention. We will not naturally become a younger society again, our workforce will not naturally expand, and investments will not come easily to our region if we stay the course. The reality is that although the impact of this phenomenon is seen clearly in Atlantic Canada today, the entire country has an aging population, which is only compounded in the east by outmigration to other provinces. Atlantic Canada is the canary in the coal mine, but we have proven time and time again that we are nimble and adaptive and that there is still much room for optimism. Madam Speaker, I recognize that the natural inclination to increase the economic outlook in Atlantic Canada may be for governments to remain laser-focused on job creation, and it clearly is a critical component to any plan for the future. However, the Ivany report states that we cannot sustain economic growth over time unless renewed population growth provides us more workers, more entrepreneurs, and more consumers. Over the last several decades, Atlantic Canada has tried to renew economic growth without a focus on immigration, and the result has been continued loss of skilled workers and educated youth to other regions, and also limited investment. After reading countless reports and studies on the population and economic issues of Atlantic Canada, the most promising news is that the increasing immigration could quite possibly turn the tides. A research paper funded by Citizenship and Immigration Canada in December 2008 and written by academics from St. Mary's University and Halifax and the University of Prince Edward Island looked at the socio-economic profiles of immigrants in the 4 Atlantic provinces. This report shows that immigration has actually already been working in our favor. The report states that immigrant inflows in Atlantic Canada have helped slow population decline. And had there been no immigration between 1996 and 2001, the region's population decline would have been 16.5% higher than the actual decline. During 2001 to 2006, this decline would have been 93.6% higher without immigration. My own research suggests that from 2006 to 2011, immigration contributed to 53% of the total population growth in Atlantic Canada. Madam Speaker, I understand people's reservations concerning the need for more immigrants in Atlantic Canada at a time when people are leaving the region because of the lack of meaningful employment. However, studies have shown a direct correlation between economic growth and immigration. In fact, one only needs to look back over the history of Canada to realize that Canada has always experienced growth by welcoming immigrants. We have seen time and time again that those who take the initiative to move to the greatest country of the world not only settle and make their way, but they often invest, grow businesses, and employ people. In Fundy Royal, we only need to look as far as the nearest farm, our successful local chain of hotels, the popular eating establishments, the arts community, and the industrial supplier to see what healthy, diverse, sustainable immigration can do for the region, and how many jobs can be created through increased immigration. The Ivany Commission report also states that one rarely hears serious arguments that higher rates of international immigration have been bad for Canada over the long term. Immigration and economic expansion are mutually reinforcing, and both are necessary if the future outlook is to improve. Madam Speaker, we need to start talking about the success stories related to immigration in order to counter the most common fear to immigration in Atlantic Canada. The Honourable President of the Treasury Board has said that this fear is often simply the fear of the unknown. The recent welcoming of Syrian refugees in Atlantic communities has demonstrated Atlantic Canadians can be warm and welcoming to newcomers, and in many cases it has given them the opportunity to experience the value that newcomers bring to a community. Madam Speaker, we also must consider that in 2001, the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency analyzed the regions of Atlantic Canada where immigrants settled and suggested that immigrants do settle in counties with higher unemployment rates, yet they experience a lower unemployment rate relative to the total resident population. This observation points to the possibility that often immigrants are working in jobs that local residents are not willing to take, or that these particular counties' unemployment levels may be of a structural nature, and that local labor pool does not possess the qualifications to fill the vacant jobs. What we are seeing now is that while federal and provincial governments have many policies and programs in place to help workers receive training and education needs for the jobs available, the projected vacancies are far more that can be filled by Atlantic Canadians alone. Immigration can help address the skill shortages, holding back economic development and improving the region's prospects. For example, just last week, I visited J.D. Irving Limited's Maritime Innovation Limited Laboratory in Sussex, New Brunswick, where I was advised that the company is looking to hire 7,278 people over the next 3 years in its diverse operations in Canada. Achieving this goal for them means a focus on keeping New Brunswickers at home, as in the case of the company's recent hiring of 47 workers that worked at the closed potash mine. As well, they're looking at growing talent at home through partnerships with local universities and community colleges. Welcoming newcomers to make Canada home is also part of their strategy. A good example is Mr. Malai Manoharan, a scientist employed at the laboratory. Malai came to Canada from India to study agriculture at the Truro campus at Dalhousie University. He achieved his Master's of Science degree and was hired by the company to contribute to research and innovation here in New Brunswick. He is currently applying for permanent residency status in Canada. Two of the fastest growing cities in Atlantic Canada are Halifax and Moncton, and both mayors are looking to immigration as a means of growth because they project that job vacancies in their cities will exceed the current workforce. In the words of Mayor Mike Savage in Halifax, instead of calling people come from a ways, we need to tell them come from away. It's also important to note that building more diverse communities in Atlantic Canada will help us in repatriating friends and family who have migrated to other parts of Canada. Those people still come home every chance they get because they do love the lifestyle of Atlantic Canada. In order to bring them home again permanently, we're going to need outside sources to match to the thousands of jobs which have gone unfilled for over a year and existing businesses who do have the potential to create new economic opportunities. As a country, we have an opportunity right now to study the narrative of Atlantic Canada, and we develop immigration policy as we develop immigration policy applicable in the region today and other provinces in the future. Madam Speaker, I'm very pleased to inform the House that since I began work on this motion, a whole-of-government approach, the Atlantic Growth Strategy, was announced on July 4, 2016, as a series of evidence-based collaborative actions to enhance Atlantic Canada's economic performance. I would like to think that my work on this motion and the work of my team and colleagues has contributed to the government's decision to include a 3-year employer-driven immigration pilot program to attract and retain newcomers in Atlantic Canada as part of the strategy. Currently, the federal government and the provinces are working together to identify policies that impact immigration, such as credential recognition and legislation like Bill C-6, which would allow 50% credit for time spent in Canada for international students wishing to continue on their path to citizenship. The Atlantic Canada Immigration Pilot is an opportunity to test innovative approaches that will help to enhance retention and potentially could be replicated in other provinces and territories depending on results. The pilot project will accept up to 2,000 more applications from immigrants plus their family members in 2017, with rising numbers in the following years depending on performance. In addition to the immigration pilot program, the Atlantic Growth Strategy focuses on 4 other important areas: innovation, clean growth and climate change, trade and investment, and infrastructure. The initiative has been well received by the Atlantic provincial premiers, the Atlantic business community, and think tanks such as the Atlantic Provinces Economic Council. More importantly, it has sparked a conversation that has people in the streets talking about where we need to go to really change our prospects for growth. In fact, just last week, I hosted a roundtable with local businesses, community leaders, and stakeholders who praised the initiative. After concluding the roundtable, I was very encouraged by a local business who wanted to continue the dialogue about how they could start thinking outside the box in order to welcome newcomers to the workforce and include immigration as part of their recruitment strategy. They came up with ideas such as having clusters of newcomers working together with support from other employees and management to make sure that they felt comfortable and had the opportunity to share ideas concerning safety and efficiencies. Madam Speaker, given the government's swift action on this file, I would be open to a friendly amendment to the motion that would focus the committee's work on the examination of retention and settlement with the view of bringing forward recommendations on best practices. This would include examining experiences flowing from the immigration pilot. Madam Speaker, Atlantic Canada has a long history of being resilient, a region settled by a distinct mix of British, Scottish, Gaelic, and French immigrants. The time has come for us to encourage the new visitors to stay and begin a new chapter in the history of the East Coast.
Unfortunately, the time is up, but I'm sure that you'd be able to probably finish some of your input into some of the questions and answers. Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Rimouski, Neigette, Témiscouata, Les Basques. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thanks to my colleague who's presented a motion calling for a study on immigration to the Atlantic provinces as a possible solution to the demographic challenge that the 4 eastern provinces are currently facing. I listened to her speech and she didn't really mention demographics for the Francophone population or Francophone communities in the 4 Atlantic provinces. We know there's a serious problem. 2% of immigration outside Quebec is Francophone. And the problem was raised by the Official Languages Commissioner in New Brunswick when she mentioned that New Brunswick was lagging behind English-speaking communities when it came to immigration. So I was just wondering how the Immigration Committee could deal with this issue of Francophone immigration to those 4 provinces. The Honourable Member for Fundy Royal.
Speaker, I appreciate the honourable member's comments on this, and I believe it's important to focus on both English and French immigration in Atlantic Canada. I know that the province of New Brunswick has taken a particular focus on this and is already looking at immigration policies, and I would advise the committee to look at this in depth as well to see if there are ways to increase French immigration. Thank you.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for St. John's East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And thank you very much as well to the member from Fundy Royal for being a leader in our caucus, in the Atlantic Caucus, on this issue of immigration. Anyone in Atlantic Canada can immediately see the aging, how our population is aging, how there are fewer and fewer young families, and how we need to do something if we want to maintain our economic growth. I know that not only the member for Fundy Royal, but also the member for Central Nova and myself have all written articles on this topic in our local papers, and we've reached out and held roundtables on these topics. I would like to thank the Minister of Immigration, Canadian Citizenship for coming to Newfoundland and Labrador and hosting those with me. And it's a real testament to the work that's being done, that this friendly amendment is being proposed around the notion of looking at retention of immigration in Newfoundland and Labrador and the other Atlantic Canadian provinces, and also on settlement and appropriately allowing newcomers to participate in our economy in an appropriate way, and also to help the local people learn to appreciate the newcomers and their things. So I would like to ask the member for Fundy Royal how she feels this particular amendment regarding settlement and retention services will affect the people of New Brunswick. Thank you.
A member for Fundy Royal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for the very excellent question. I think there's a real opportunity here for the committee to study retention because, let's face the facts, we can't just attract people, but we need to be studying the ways that we can retain them in our communities and the ways that the communities need to be involved in this resettlement. And we know that immigrants are most likely to stay in the areas that they arrive when they are welcomed and they're provided support. And sometimes that's as easy as a drop-in visit to see how they're doing, and also making sure the support is there for their families as well. We need to make sure that their children are welcome into schools. And I have to look back at the refugee project that this country has undertaken as a real success story, and how communities have shown that they are very excited to do this for newcomers. And there's been many wonderful stories about how they have welcomed refugees into their communities, and I look forward to the committee study on that as well.
We have time for a brief question. Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Lévis-Lobinière. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her speech. I'd like to ask her whether, when it comes to Francophone immigration in areas where Francophones are in the minority, what is the government going to do to help those minorities and to help immigrants settle there? And is Francophone immigration to Western Canada going to be an asset too? The honourable member for Fundy Royal.
Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for the question. He's asked the question, what is the government going to do? And that's really not what this motion is about. The motion is about asking the Committee for Citizenship and Immigration to look at ways of increasing immigration. I agree that we need to look at the Francophone population as well and any specifics around that. This is about a study by the committee. Thank you.
Resuming debate. Reprise de débat.